We are witnessing a fragmenting global order, an increasing disregard for international rules and norms by big and regional powers. In fact, the use of hard power by countries, which is the use of military force, has become all too frequent in pursuit of a might is right approach. President Donald Trump is, of course, reinforcing and sharpening these trends and pushing the world into a Hobbesian state of lawlessness. But he isn't the only one, because the trend has already been there before his assumption of power. Today, the world is increasingly become one ruled by impunity. This era of impunity is reflected not just in the US assault on Iran and, of course, its kidnapping of the president of Venezuela, but the genocide carried out by Israel in Gaza, its military attacks on all its neighboring countries, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and of course India's military strikes against Pakistan last year. Now, none of these powers thought their actions entailed much cost, and they haven't faced any international accountability. So if international institutions were designed to deter and check such behavior, then that isn't happening in today's no-rules world. Multilateralism and multilateral institutions have been under stress for well over a decade. But the attitude of big powers, especially Trump's conduct, has accelerated this trend and magnified the pressure. The UN's paralysis, in fact, the UN Security Council's paralysis and ineffectiveness is evident from its failure to stop the genocide in Gaza, stop the US and Israel in the war that they have imposed on Iran, Russia's war in Ukraine, and of course, other conflicts such as the one in Sudan. Its growing irrelevance is laid bare by its role as a bystander in wars and crises, unable to perform its core responsibility, albeit due to big power politics and clashing interests. The result is a loss of faith in multilateralism, with trust in global institutions, including the UN Security Council, which has the primary responsibility for the maintenance of peace and security, at an all-time low. Of course, if the Security Council is paralyzed because of lack of consensus amongst the big powers between the P5 or the permanent five, then very few options are left actually for other members of the international community, including middle powers, to follow a course of action that is opposed by any one of these powers. So what is left for them to do really, and that's the challenge, and we haven't seen that happen yet, but it's a challenge that the Canadian Prime Minister recently addressed when he said the time has come for middle powers to cooperate more closely so they can resist a big power bullying. I'm of course paraphrasing him. So the challenge of whether this cooperation is possible amongst the middle powers, let's not forget they have different interests. They don't always have common interests. Some are in the business of resisting a big power which is trying to coerce them or even imposing war on them. And then there are others that follow a more transactional approach and may not want to cooperate because of their own individual interests. So it's not clear how far countries of the global south are able to come together, which they need to, of course, to uphold international law. Of course, we hear statements all the time from them, from countries of the global south, and also many countries in Europe, of the need to, uphold international law, follow international norms. But that doesn't mean that these statements translate into action. If we look at the UN, it's clear that power within the UN system is unequally distributed. And this reflects the international architecture that was built after the Second World War and who its victors were. So it is the permanent five who were the victors of the Second World War, among the 15 members of the Security Council who wield decisive power on issues of peace and security, which is the principal responsibility of the Security Council. Now, these members, or the five permanent members of the Council, possess veto power, which further buttresses their position and creates an inequality that persists to date. The power as permanent members is written into the UN Charter. So unless there is reform which everyone has to agree to, including the P5, and the Charter has to be modified or amended, we are not going to get a change in what we have been witnessing, which is one or the other member of the permanent five doesn't want something to happen. It uses its veto, and sometimes just the threat of the veto is good enough, and that action that is needed never takes place. For example, a very good example is there has been, it took many months, in fact, over a year, for even a weak resolution calling for a ceasefire in Gaza to be agreed amongst the P5, and the other members of the Security Council are all on board. But there were differences. Largely it was the US that exercised a veto, I think, 3 times, preventing a ceasefire much earlier than it should have taken place.